Well, folks, here we are. We finally made it to the end of Cannabis Month. It's now June 1st, 2020. And I am pleased to be joined by Barrington Miller, my colleague at the Canadian Securities Exchange. And why are we doing this video? This is going to be a very quick 8-minute video on our 5 things that we learned, 5 things that we learned during Cannabis Month at the CSE. What was Cannabis Month? Cannabis Month was an event. It was an event that happened on Instagram Live. It happened on YouTube. It happened on the Hashtag Finance podcast. Basically anywhere on the internet where content happens, CSE hosted cannabis-based content from our lens of the capital markets. Barrington Miller, our host for much of this content, along with Anil Mall, Anna Sarin, Grace Padota, even Phil Shum, I think, got in on the action. There was a lot of people. Yeah. So thanks, Bear. Thank you so much for hosting. But so we're going to get into it right away. 5 things that we learned about cannabis industry, about the cannabis industry through this Cannabis Month. We just called it Cannabis Month, May 2020. Number 1, tell me what the number 1 thing was that we learned talking to all these CEOs and experts in the cannabis industry in Cannabis Month.
Well, for me, and we don't actually have a ranked list. We're going to go all over the place because every host had their own experiences. Mine was banking versus legalization. And by that, I mean, in the United States, it's considered federally illegal to as an industry. But on the state level, it's A-okay. And so the majority of states have opted to proceed operating in the business of cannabis on the state level versus the federal risks that are there. So we asked a bunch of CEOs, COOs, industry types, what do you want changed first? And drum roll, please. The overwhelming winner was banking ahead of legalization.
Yeah.
Now, when we were talking about it, it was articulated to us. Banking already has that framework. Banking already has the language. Banking would be the easiest and the fastest to actually come to realization. And that's something that I wasn't thinking of. And again, one of our guests, I think it was Sahar, explained very, very eloquently, a lot more than I can do, was that it gives the banks the option. Just because if this goes through, it doesn't mean all the cannabis companies will just be accepted. It gives them the option to accept accounts that are dealing with cannabis and that those companies in return won't be prosecuted or denied because they're in that industry. So, I'm going to say 7 out of 8, 7 out of 9 voted for banking. The ones that voted for legalization definitely had their own perspectives as to why. And yeah, that was surprising. What about you, James? What's the number 1 thing that you learned from this week?
Again, we're not doing this in any specific order, but and I will note that the opinions we got about this were from the very top. These are the top MSO CEOs, so multi-state operators. We're talking about CEOs like Joe Lazzardi at Cureleaf. These are plus billion market cap companies, Cresco Labs, Charlie Bachtell, and Kim Rivers at TrueLeaf. And that leads me to my next point, which was the culture. So we talk about COVID, and we're talking about the challenges that COVID is posing on not just the cannabis industry, but all of us. But for the cannabis industry, when we ask continually that question of how are you guys dealing with COVID, it always came back to culture. And we found that the companies that really exhibited culture and emphasized culture were having, this is more of a qualitative measure, but a better time dealing with this. They had a culture that could adapt, that could stay positive. So a lot of companies like Charlie was talking about and Joseph Lazzardi about how they had to rapidly move to curbside delivery. And I know Gary Santo Jr. as well at Columbia Care mentioned this. And this has been something that I noticed continually with these top CEOs as they emphasize culture. So I'm going to say this, and I can't use the word too many times, but culture was just a major, major tool that they were using in dealing with COVID. And, I can't stress enough that term. So, okay, that was 2, and I promised 5. So number 3 was, the US MSOs on that theme alone. I want to mention how, and we can talk about this, is how the US MSOs are now really distinguishing themselves as their own valued industry in the stock market. A lot of time over the last couple of years, especially if things have been pretty depressed here in Canada with the Canadian big producers, we're now seeing a decoupling of valuation. We're not seeing, something bad happen in Canada and now affecting a U.S. Valuation as much. We just had great earnings reports from some of the top companies in the U.S., many of which listed on the CSE. And I don't know, Bear, what was your take on seeing earnings come out this last few weeks?
Well, the companies listed on our exchange absolutely crushed it. They blew away expectations. And it's funny, when these companies got listed, the valuations that they had were, some would say, ridiculous based on the little evidence that existed for those valuations. Now that they've had time to produce, they've had time to earn revenues, they've had time to just be a business and grow, they're again blowing the doors off of their expectations. So I am extremely pleased. And I don't know if COVID helped. I don't know if this was going to happen. But the reality is it did. So it doesn't really matter what I think.
Yeah, the results speak for themselves, double-digit growth, top-line revenues for some of these companies. Just because it's being treated as an essential service in many states, but that doesn't, negate the fact you got to run a good business. So that's what we're seeing, which leads me back to another thing with a lot of these MSOs and CEOs. Why are they succeeding? Because they've been here before. Maybe not a global pandemic, because this is very unique situation, but we see people like Jason Ackerman at TerraSend, who used to run a grocery chain. His podcast, we call From Cod to Cannabis.
Yeah.
I mean, trying to sell someone fish over the internet and then selling cannabis doesn't seem that hard, does it?
Yes. Our fourth point is your past life. So I had the pleasure of speaking with Jen Drake from Air Strategies, big time M&A. I think it was Goldman. And this will lead into the fifth point regarding strategy. But, this gave them experience, and the leaders, everything that with these companies flows from the top down, and the leaders are pulling from their experiences of past lives and pushing it forward. Charlie, same with him. I believe he came from the mortgage crisis.
Yeah.
It's like mortgage crisis or cannabis. Yeah, this thing is no problem. And I'm using it very loosely. I know it's difficult to run a business, but the things that happened in those past lives prepared them for what's happening today and going forward.
That's right. And Steve White as well at Harvest Health and Recreation. He's had a pretty illustrious career as a lawyer. So
yeah, exactly.
The list goes on and on and on. No one ever was in cannabis 20 years ago. So those who really brought the action, they had some prior experience. Okay, last point. I promise you just 5 in no particular order. The last one was strategy. So what have we learned about the industry through our conversation over Cannabis Month? Well, it's that not everyone's trying to boil the ocean, take over the world. There's this emphasis on that. Okay, we've been in this now for almost 6 years, some of these people, that there are very defined strategies, whether it's geographic, sector, or a certain spectrum of the value chain that they're trying to cover. So, Bear, I know you talked to a lot of these people, and I was really impressed by those who had the restraint and the understanding of what their market was. Were there any that stood out to you?
Yeah, when it came to restraint, it was one of the first ones I spoke with was Charlie from Cresco. Charlie had money thrown at them. When a lot of the time when companies were unable to raise money, and same with Cureleaf, they had money and they actually turned down deals. They said, no, this isn't in the best interest of the industry or our shareholders or the actual company. We are going to wait. Same with Kim Rivers. They are going to wait. So when it came to having money available, it's actually harder to say, you know what, we're going to take a little pause on that and we're going to stick with what we know. And of course, that is in of itself a strategy. When it came to the pinpointing accuracy of their vision, TerraSend stands out. They shifted their strategy when they came. Cannabis itself, we call it 1.0, 2.0. The same thing happened with management teams. And the TerraSend management team has actually shifted and changed. And now they are essentially a U.S. company, even though they have Canadian operations. Same with Air. Air looked at numbers. Jen Drake, she looks at numbers. Mm-hmm. What is going to work and what isn't going to work. And we have a lot of really good interviews that our executives from those companies cover and talk about specific strategies. Same with edibles. Edibles is a completely different market than, say, vaporizers. That is a strategy. The strategy of having an item taste like food and not have that cannabis flavor. Again, those are all strategies. And I was really, really impressed at the diversity, not only of the individuals, but of the companies and how they're employing it.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, in data, I mean, people who take a very data-driven approach, again, like Columbia Care, fascinating how people can now use metrics in this industry. Maybe that's what Cannabis 3.0 is ultimately won and lost over is the control of data and how to use it. But we'll have to wait till next year, folks, because that was Cannabis Month 2020. I'm looking forward to Cannabis Month 2021. I'm looking forward to all the content we're going to share between then and or now and then. And you can catch it all by subscribing to us here on YouTube. If you can do anything, there'll be a subscribe now button coming right up. Subscribe to the channel. We're going to have more great cannabis content. You can go through the whole month worth of content through our playlist. And again, thanks for watching. Thanks for participating. And once again, Barrington, thank you for your hard work in all these interviews. And until next time, we'll see you on CSE TV.
Take care.